Hey, picture this. I'm scrolling through the depths of the internet, and I stumble upon this Telegram channel called TheBleakNarratives. I mean, the name alone sends shivers down my spine. It's like something out of a dystopian thriller, right? And it makes you wonder, who are these people? And what makes their narrative so bleak? Hey, everyone, get ready. Because today we are taking a deep dive into the U.S. mortgage crisis. You guys sent over a ton of intense stuff. Court documents, congressional hearing transcripts, legal guides. We've even got a consumer guide from the CFPB. It's a lot to unpack. But no worries, by the end of this deep dive, we'll have waded through it all together, and you'll have a much clearer picture of how this crisis happened.
You know, what I find so fascinating about all this is how it goes way beyond just like individual people making bad decisions. This was a systemic breakdown, and it all starts with this process called mortgage securitization.
Yeah.
Actually, you included a really helpful diagram in your research that shows this. You see how all these different loans are bundled together and then sold off to investors as these things called mortgage-backed securities.
Right, so it's not like, selling a car where it's just one person buying from one person. It's more like this massive game of hot potato. At least that's how your foreclosure defense handbook puts it, with all that risk being passed around. And nobody wants to be the one left holding the bag when things inevitably go bad.
Exactly. And then to make the whole thing even more complicated, we have MERS, the Mortgage Electronic Registration Systems. In theory, it was supposed to keep track of who owned all these loans, but I think it's safe to say instead of making things clearer, it kind of just muddied the waters, especially when it came time for foreclosures.
Hold on. So because of this MERS system, it became really difficult to figure out who even had the right to foreclose on a home in the first place.
That's exactly right. They might have been trying to streamline things, but what they ended up creating was this system where it was really hard to hold anyone accountable, especially when homeowners were being wrongly foreclosed on burner.
Wow. This is making me wonder, like, if I have a mortgage, do I even know who owns my loan? It's probably not as straightforward as I think it is.
That's such a good question. And it's one that a lot of homeowners found themselves asking during this whole crisis, this whole tangled web of ownership. That's going to be a really important thing to remember as we get deeper into how things went wrong.
So we've got this system where it's almost impossible to tell who owns what. And then on top of that, my research turned up some pretty disturbing testimony about the mortgage servicers, the companies that collect our mortgage payments.
Oh, yeah. When you really dig into these testimonies, you start to see this clear conflict of interest baked right into how the whole system was set up.
Oh, really? Like what?
Okay, so imagine this. You're a homeowner, right? And the mortgage servicer, they own a second mortgage on your home. But they're also the ones managing your first mortgage, the one that's all bundled up with everyone else's. It's kind of like, where's the incentive to look out for you in that situation?
Right. So they're wearing all these different hats.
Yeah.
And these hats don't always have the same goals.
Exactly.
It's like a recipe for disaster.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, then you've got the whole junk fees issue running rampant during this whole period. Yeah.
Say more about that. What are those exactly?
So picture this. You're already struggling to keep your home.
Right.
And then, on top of your regular mortgage payments, the servicer tax on all these extra charges.
Oh, come on.
Things like inflated property inspection fees, unnecessary insurance policies, you name it. And guess what?
Right.
These fees often directly benefited companies that were affiliated with the servicer.
You're kidding. So not only were they profiting from people losing their homes, but they were finding ways to squeeze even more money out of them at the same time.
Yeah, it was really a perfect storm of terrible incentives and just predatory practices.
Oh, wow.
One of the documents you shared, it was a legal document about the problems in mortgage servicing, and it mentioned this court case. Henry Stewart is a really awful example. Wells Fargo was charging homeowners for property appraisals in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina.
No way. Well, the city was literally under an evacuation order. That's unbelievable. It's just mind-blowing how they thought they could get away with that.
I know.
Makes you wonder how many people got hit with those kinds of fees. It's just like adding insult to injury,
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got this crazy system where no one knows who owns what, plus all these conflicts of interest, and then they're just like piling on bogus fees left and right. But wait, it gets even crazier, because now we're going to talk about lost paperwork. Seriously.
You're not kidding. It happened all the time. You included some really interesting legal documents in your research that go into this. Servicers would routinely claim they couldn't find the original mortgage notes, which, kind of a big deal when you're trying to prove you have the right to foreclose on someone.
Hold up. They lost the paperwork. That's like losing the deed to your house.
Yeah.
How can you even foreclose if you can't prove you own the loan?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was a question raised in a lot of court cases. You see, to foreclose, legally you need what's called standing. Basically, it means you have to be able to prove you have the legal right to enforce the debt. That research paper you sent over, the paper chase, it really digs into this whole thing. Judges were throwing these cases out left and right because the servicers were relying on all this shaky evidence, things like these lost note affidavits, to try to justify what they were doing.
So it wasn't enough to just say, hey, we own this loan. They needed the actual documents to back it up.
Exactly.
Are there any, big examples of cases where this all came to a head?
Oh, yeah, for sure. In Re Wilhelm and Deutsche Bank National Trust Company v. Stevens. Those are two really landmark cases that your research highlighted, where the judges basically just put their foot down and said, nope, you can't foreclose, you haven't proven anything.
Wow, it's just wild how this was happening on such a massive scale.
It really is.
But it sounds like somebody finally stepped in and tried to bring some order to this whole mess, right?
You're right. Eventually, the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they issued this thing called the Mortgage Special Rule to try and regulate some of these debt collection practices.
So what'd they do?
Basically, they laid down the law. They said servicers have to give borrowers clear and accurate information about their debt. Like, no more hiding the...
About time, right. But even with those new rules in place, we've still heard some pretty awful stories today.
Yeah, it's true.
What advice would you give to someone who's facing foreclosure? I mean, it just sounds completely overwhelming.
Honestly, you're right. This is about way more than just the legal stuff. It's incredibly stressful, it's emotional, it's a lot to deal with. If I had to give just one piece of advice, it would be this. Don't go through it alone. That guide you shared, A Tactical Guide to Foreclosure, Bankruptcy, and Creditor Harassment, that's a goldmine of practical advice. It actually explains how filing for bankruptcy can sometimes give you a bit of breathing room in these situations. Filing for bankruptcy triggers something called an automatic stay. It basically puts a temporary hold on any foreclosure actions.
Oh, wow. So it buys you some time to figure things out.
Exactly.
That's good to know. I think it's easy to feel powerless when you're up against something like this. But just knowing that you have options can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. That guide also mentions something called foreclosure mediation programs. It's where you can actually sit down with your lender and try to negotiate a better deal.
Oh, interesting.
And there are some amazing legal aid organizations and housing counseling agencies out there. They're specifically dedicated to helping homeowners navigate all of this.
That's fantastic to know. Well, this has been a deep dive in every sense of the word. We've gone from the shadowy world of mortgage securitization to the very real human cost of this system that often felt stacked against everyday homeowners.
I think you said it best. You provided a ton of incredible information.
And I think what's clear is that this whole crisis was a massive wake-up call. It showed everyone the dangers of a system that prioritizes profits over people. So the big question is, have we actually learned from our mistakes? And what are we doing to prevent something like this from ever happening again? That's something for all of us to think about. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time.
All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are taking a deep dive into the U.S. mortgage crisis. You guys sent over a ton of intense stuff. Court documents, congressional hearing transcripts, legal guides. We've even got a...
Oh, that was fucking entertaining. That was entertaining. So, table extraction, I guess. I was going to get into some shit this evening afterwards, but I think I might just run another one on Brady. There's nobody here anyway, so Brady violations it is. Cheers.